We've got 3 short chapters today. We're really going for it, but these are probably the most dramatic chapters of the whole book. So, without further ado, let's get on with it. First one is called Explorer School. The next day was Thursday, a full 12 days since the crash. Fred was woken from a nightmare about a burning aeroplane by the vulture pecking at the back of his head. He sat up. "Hey," he said. The vulture looked at him, an irate glare of disdain for the slack of a world that had failed it. "Heel," came a voice from outside, followed by a whistle. The vulture waded out of the stone room. Fred followed. "Good boy," said the explorer to the vulture, tussling its naked red head as if it was a dog. The fire outside the stone room had already been lit. "Wake the others," said the explorer. "It's only just sunrise," said Fred dubiously. "Max sometimes threatens to pee on you if you wake him up too early." "Wake him up anyway. If he chooses to weaponize his urine, so be it. I've been watching you all, and there are some basic techniques for survival that you don't yet know. I'll be working late today, so you need to listen now." He glanced down at Fred's palm and saw the mark. He said nothing, but it was possible, Fred thought, that the left side of his face smiled half an inch. "Come, hurry, Explorer School's in session." Good boy. The others emerged, rubbing their eyes. The explorer handed out pieces of meat from a gourd cut into a serving bowl. "To get home, you need to know both the river and the land. Tell me what you know." It was hard to say what the meat was. A bird, Fred thought, but it might have been a fish. He ate as slowly as he could, chewing each piece until it turned to pulp in his mouth. "We already know the river quite well," said Con proudly. "We came on a raft." "Describe it." "Fred made it," said Con. She grinned at him. Her cheek was covered in mosquito bites, but her smile was broad. He was fanatical about it. "What did you use?" the explorer asked Fred. Fred described it as best he could. He tried not to sound too proud of it. "Sounds like a good design," the explorer said, and Fred felt his face burn hot with pleasure. "I came across the Negre, I came across the Negre by raft from Manaus on one of my first expeditions." "Don't cry. You're so attention-seeking." "I used a similar model. Not as good as a dugout canoe, but quicker to make." "What's the expedition looking for?" said Fred. "Various things. Some of the men were looking for a city, others for plants for new medicine. I was just hungry to see the world. We were naive and clumsy. 2 men died, but I loved it." The explorer began sketching a map in the dust. "You come this way, past the edge of the rapids by Dead Man's Point, and north. The water leaps in your face, the raft tries to ride the waves the way you would a horse, and me trying to make sure the bamboo rod I used to steer didn't jerk and impale me through the ribs. Some of the happiest days of my life." He handed out more meat. Max widened his eyes in appeal and was given double. Con opened her mouth to object, then closed it again. "Stop moaning. You'll have to do part of the same journey I made before you reach the city. It will be choppy, foam and rocks. You can get thrown up several feet in the air, so you'll have to tie the little one on. If anyone falls overboard, they can't grab onto the raft in those waters without capsizing it." "Really?" said Lila. "But couldn't you?" "No," he said sternly. "The only honourable thing to do is drown." "Oh," said Lila. "Oh," said Fred. "Fine," said Con. "What else?" "And then there are certain preparations you must make. Have you got a pen?" They didn't, of course, but Lila took a flint and began to scratch into a piece of grey stone. "In the forest, 50 miles down from here," said the explorer, adding to the dust map, "you'll come across a kind of bee. It's absolutely minuscule and rather beautiful. It's drawn to sweat and to moisture, and it's happiest when nesting in the centre of the pupil of your eye. The people there call them eye lickers. Write that down." "Eye lickers," said Lila, scratching hard. There was no fear in her face, only concentration. Bacca climbed on top of her head and sat there, inquisitive. A bit like you. "The best thing to do is to wear a bit of net over your eyes." "Could we make netting?" asked Fred. "That's a good question. It's one of the very few things that is almost impossible to make." "Could I—" Fred closed his eyes and tried to picture what the net would need. "Punch holes in a bit of snake skin?" "Well, you could," The explorer looked at Fred, nodding slowly. That's not a bad idea, in fact. But finding snakeskin is difficult in these parts. The vultures eat them. I have one mosquito net. It's the most valuable thing I own, I think. They waited. I suppose I could cut off 4 pieces and you can tie them round the back of your heads with vines. Thank you, said Lila and Fred together. That's kind, said Con solemnly. The explorer waved it away, frowning, unexpectedly awkward in the face of gratitude. And then the vampire bats. He added further lines to the map, and some spikes to show hills. You'll need to find a way to deal with them. Con looked up. Please tell me that's a joke. Not at all. They come in swarms, not around here, but on the other side of the mountain. You must have heard of them. No, said Con. Fred hadn't either, but Lila will have done, he said. I've never seen one, said Lila, but their front teeth are sharper than razors, and their tongues give off a chemical that stops your blood from clotting. Quite, said the explorer. It's all very impressive from an evolutionary point of view, but very frustrating from a personal one. Oh, where are you going? Frustrating, said Con. Bats that eat you are frustrating. They don't eat you, dear child. They drink you. I assure you there's a difference. When you strike around the mountain, you need to be very wary of maggots. Maggots, said Con. The skin on her face was a lurid white. Yes, it's unpleasant to think of yourself as the kind of person maggots to choose to associate with, but there you are. There was a disconcerting moment many years ago when a maggot worked its way out of its skin. It poked its head up out of my body like a meerkat rising from a hole. It was extremely surprising. I'll teach you how to extract them with a thorn and some fire. Remind me. Lila wrote maggots on the list and added a question mark. The explorer looked at them appraisingly. You should go soon. You're nearly ready. Fred stared at him. Somehow the news didn't fill him with the relief it should have done. You should go before the rains. You can fish now. Fred knows how to set a trap. With that and the... Don't sniff the camera. With that and the tarantulas and the berries, you should survive. The maggots get worse during the rains, and the going is much slower when the ground is boggy. And there's yellow fever, of course. Oh, of course, said Con. She sounded a little hysterical. Maggots aren't enough without a fever turning you yellow. It sounds like a proper holiday. The explorer ignored her. When you get back into the city, when they ask you how you found your way, you must lie. We'll say whatever you want, said Con. And no matter how many people ask around, you must never mention my name. Do you understand? We don't know your name, Con pointed out. What is it, so we know what not to say? The man gave a grumble, half anger, half amusement, deep in his throat. He rose and hefted the vulture into his arms. I'll be working today. If you try to come behind the vine wall again, I'll feed your toes to the vulture. Yes, we know, said Con. What was the meat? Asked Fred as the explorer turned to go. It was good. What? Oh, caiman, the one in the lake, he said. That night, Max came and tugged at Fred's foot. Fred, he hissed. His whisper was extremely damp. Fred, I have bad news. Oh, it's all right. It's all right. I have bad news. I have bad feelings. What? Fred jerked awake, searching for Max's face in the dark. I have a bad feeling, said Max. A lot of bad feelings. Shh, Max, what are you scared of? Max's voice was whiny, but there was a real fear to it. There's something coming. There's nothing coming, said Fred. You're probably dreaming about the caiman. He listened. The forest was never still. It rustled and insects called and monkeys bellowed all night long, but it didn't sound any quieter or louder than usual. What kind of thing? An animal. It's watching us, or a monster, I know it. There's no monsters, Max. They're watching, I heard them. The animals are just... Excuse me. Don't be rude. The animals are just living their own lives, Max. I promise, they're not interested in us. I can hear them breathing. You don't need to worry. The only thing you need to do is go to sleep. It was dark under the vine roof, but Fred could see that Max's eyes were wide and unconvinced, and his hair was wet with sweat. Can I come and sleep next to you? Fred hesitated. Max was not a quiet sleeper. He thrashed a lot, and bit things and farted in his sleep. Please? All right, but please try not to bite me, okay? Yes, said Max. He took a firm hold of Fred's wrist, put it in his mouth, and went to sleep. It was just as Fred was falling asleep that he saw the movement in the trees. He rose to his knees and crossed, keeping low, to the doorway of the stone house. He looked out over the square. Moonlight filtered through the holes in the canopy. Something was watching them. It wasn't an animal, nor was it a monster. It was the explorer. He was sitting in a low branch, leaning easily against the trunk, knife in hand, keeping guard. And that is the end of that chapter. Go on to the next one. The next one is called Stuck in the Mud. They woke to rain so heavy that Fred could barely see his own hand when he held it out in front of him. The explorer had left fresh fish outside their doorway, but he was nowhere to be seen. There was only the white, thundering smoke of the rain. It filtered through the roof and dropped on their faces. They crouched, bleak, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. They grew steadily wetter. Let's go and hide under the statues, said Fred. We can take the fish. They pelted across the square towards the far end, where the 4 vast statues stood. Bacca let out a snuffling, mewling sound as Lila ran with him, her feet sliding in the mud. Behind the statues, up against the wall, was a slight overhang, enough to shelter under. They crouched, all 4 in a line, watching the sky and scaling the fish. Fred half expected the explorer to be there too, keeping dry, but there was no trace of him. Fred threw a stone into the downpour and watched it disappear into the wall of wet. Shall we do something? Said Lila. She offered Bacca a handful of leaves from her pocket. Bacca turned away and licked his damp fur. Let's go looking for food, or we could play something. Fred put down the fish he was scaling. Play what? He was glad to stop working. The fish had made the rain slippery, and his hands were covered in nicks, and his fingernails were full of fish scales. His fingers, he saw, were calloused now, tufted over in the last few days. What game? Said Con. She sounded suspicious. I only know bridge, and we don't have any cards. Bridge? Asked Lila. Con looked defensive. We didn't play much at school, or at least sometimes the others did, but I'm not usually... Her voice trailed off. I don't want to. Aren't games for babies? Do you know Stuck in the Mud? Asked Fred. It's like tag, only if you get touched, you freeze, until someone comes along and crawls under your legs to set you free. Out in the rain? Con scratched a mosquito bite. We can't really get that much wetter, said Fred, gesturing to his jersey. It was dripping onto the fish. All right. Con jumped to her feet. Let's go. You're it, said Lila to Con. It wasn't like any game of tag Fred had played before. It was something more like swimming than running. They darted in and out of statues, slipping on the wet stone. The mud churned under their shoes and splattered all the way up to their waists. Rain got in their eyes and ears and mouths and hammered down on their hands as they tried to lunge at each other. Con ran awkwardly with her heels hitting against her bum, but her face was vivid with excitement. I didn't expect this game, said Con, panting, to be so literal. I like it. They ran outwards, towards the trees of the jungle. Fred scrambled up 2 lianas to escape pursuit, 1 in each hand, and his knees around both for balance, until Con lifted Max in her arms, and he touched Fred's ankle with the tip of his fingers. You're stuck, Max called. The rain hammered onto his upturned face and slicked his eyebrows into shape. Con put Max down. She doubled over. Wait, Fred! Lila, I think I might be dying! What? Lila skidded to a halt, throwing up an arch of mud. The side of my side! It's burning! Like fire? Yes! And it's hard to breathe? Yes! That's just a stitch. What? How do you know what a stitch is? How do you not know what a stitch is? Said Max. That's silly. Shh, Max, said Lila. She turned, calming Con's deep purple blush with her businesslike nod. It's just what happens when you run. The best thing you can do is take a fat branch in each hand and make a really strong fist around them. Right, thank you. Does that work? Fred asked. I've never tried it. Tried it. Yes, it definitely works. Con ran into the rain to find 2 sticks. Lila whispered, I don't know actually, I just made it up. But it might if you believe it will. That counts for something. Con reappeared, clutching a stick in each hand. her face pink with the effort of making a fist, straining as if she was trying to lay an egg. She thumped Fred on the shoulder. "You're it! If there was ever a chance, if ever there is a chance to play tag in the jungle in a tropical storm, it is a chance worth taking." Years later, it would shine for Fred like a gold coin that he carried with him. It was the last day of light before their days tore open. And on to our next chapter. And this is the last one before we finish for the day. The screaming wasn't coming from inside Fred's head. He sat bolt upright and stared around the stone room. Dawn was beginning to break. Corn was pushing her hair out of her eyes. Lila was already on her feet. Fred ran. Max wasn't lying on the stone floor. Max was missing. Fred ran out into the stone square, staring around at the grey light, praying that Max would jump out from behind a tree and stick his tongue out at them. "Max!" shouted Lila. "Maxie, where are you?" "Max!" roared Fred. The screaming stopped, and the silence battered itself against his skin harder than the noise. "Not again," said Con, but there was no lightness in her voice. Then Fred's stomach suddenly turned so cold, full of something writhing and maniacal. "Is that him?" He pointed at the sloping wall they had tumbled down. At the foot of a tree, there was a bundle lying at its base. Fred sprinted to the bank, but Lila outpaced him, legs working like a fury. Max lay in a ball. He was shaking, his spine convulsing against his shirt, and his breathing was rough and erratic. "Max," said Lila. "Max, are you hurt? Can you hear me?" Her hair fell over her brother's face. "Say something!" Max moaned and shook. His lips formed shapes, but he spoke no words. "What's wrong with him?" said Con. "I don't know." Lila gathered up his arms and legs and his little body and stumbled forwards. "I don't know, come on." She tripped on a rock and nearly fell on top of him. Fred held out his arms. "Shall I carry him?" "No," she said, and held Max tighter. "Where's the explorer?" she replied desperately. Her eyes raked the city. "He'll be working behind the vine curtains," said Fred. Lila turned, shouting as she ran. "Explorer! Hey! You! Where are you?" Bacca was tangled in her hair, clutching at her neck with both her arms. She didn't seem to realise the sloth was there. Fred ran after her, followed by Con, who slipped in the rain that glistened on the stones, scrambled up, her knee bleeding, and sprinted faster. Fred reached the vines ahead of Lila and began to push them away, fighting through the dense wall to where he had seen the explorer disappear. "Help!" he called. "Are you here? It's an emergency!" His voice sounded very small and thin. The vines parted and the explorer stared out, face black with anger. "What did I say to you about this place?" "Shut up!" Lila whipped to face him. Max cradled against her chest, her fingers clawing at his skin to hold him as he shook. "Max is sick. You help my brother or I'll kill you." The explorer's anger vanished. "What happened? Is he dead?" Lila let out a roar, the noise the like of which Fred had never heard. It had blood in it. Saliva flew from her mouth and she backed away. No! Don't you dare come near me if you're going to say that he's dead." She stood, the tallest 4'10" Fred had ever seen, the sloth still on her shoulder like a bird on a pirate king. She blazed. "I apologise, I was startled," said the explorer. "He's not dead. Here, give him to me." Tears poured down Lila's cheek as she lowered Fred into the explorer's arms. "Get a branch from the fire. I need more light," he said. Fred ran to find a torch. Lila stood over them, unblinking. The explorer laid Max on the floor. He pulled off his shirt and made a pillow and raised Max's head. He muttered but didn't open his eyes. The shaking jerked his legs and hid saliva around his mouth. "Is he going to be all right?" asked Lila. "I feel like I've eaten a goblin," said Con. She retched and coughed. "What can we do?" "What's happened to him?" asked Fred. "He's been bitten." "By what?" "Ants." "Ants? Thank God, I thought it was a snake." Con let out a bark of laughter and relief. The explorer shook his head. A snake would be better. He must have stood on a bullet ant colony. "Bullet ants?" Lila let out a moan. "Aren't they—" She couldn't say the word. "Deadly? They can be, particularly if there are allergies involved. He needs to get to a hospital. They can treat it, but only if he gets there soon." "How soon?" said Lila. "He will shake for another day and he'll develop a fever. The fever can't be allowed to last more than 5 days, a week at the most. It will cause the brain to swell." So he's just going to die, that's it, said Lila. You're going to let him die? You can't, I'll kill you. Her face and eyes were wild. No, of course not. The morning light showed the explorer's face was grey and suddenly ancient. I won't let him die, not another. Fred thought of the explorer's face that night around the fire as he'd talked about love. How then? Urged the explorer. Let me think, said the explorer. His tone measured. No, there's no time to sit and think, said Lila wildly. You don't care, you don't understand. We have to do something now. I do care, in fact, and I do understand. He raised Max in his arms and began to rub his hands and feet, trying to quicken the circulation. I told you I had a son. He stood and cradled Max against his chest. Come, this one will not die. But how do we get to the hospital? Said Fred. You said the walk would take a month, said Con. There's another way. What is it? Whatever it is, I'll do it. Anything, said Lila. You fly. And that is the end of that chapter. Okay, I might just leave it there and not read the rest of the story for you, but we'll see how well you do on the questions. Answer them and we'll see what you think. Leave me a note in the comment if you're wanting to read any more. Bye!